We're recording now. So welcome everyone. I am so thrilled that you're joining me here for this online course. It's wonderful to have people still doing online courses. And this is the Art and Craft of Grammar, the event that we're doing for Sheffield's Literary Festival Off the Shelf. And we've already mentioned that people are coming from mostly Sheffield, but from lots of places, even from India, which is great to see. And we've been talking about where people are from. And what I'm going to just do, we'll do a little bit of housekeeping first. There's a lot of people signed up for this event, which I'm really thrilled about. So I really appreciate you signing up. So in order to just keep it all sort of easy going, I'm just going to ask everybody to stay muted for now. And then we'll communicate with each other. Well, I'll communicate by talking. And if you've got something to suggest or to say, if you can just pop it in the chat. Kate, that's absolutely fine. Like I said, this will be, as Kate says, she's got to go pick her son up. And so it's just drop off when you need to. It'll be recorded and we'll send that to your Eventbrite email. So you'll get that probably tomorrow, to be honest. But you'll get that very soon and you'll get the recording. And if anybody else needs to drop out, that's absolutely fine. I'm just thrilled that you're here. So we'll keep everybody muted. We'll use the chat to talk. And what I may do is there's some writing exercises I'm going to ask folks to do. And so when we're doing the writing exercises, you'll have the opportunity to share those in the chat. And I'm going to actually copy and paste some of those, or one or two of those. I'm just going to make sort of random decision. So just keep in mind, if you don't want to share your actual writing experience, if you don't want it to me to actually unpick it and discuss it, which I will be doing in a very, very friendly way. But if you don't want that, please don't put it in the chat because anything that goes in the chat, I'm going to decide it's fair game for us to discuss. So just be aware of that. And you're perfectly welcome not to share your stuff. If you want to simply write it and play with it, you absolutely don't have to share it. So just to let you know about that. And as we're talking about your work, if we are talking about your work, so if yours is the one that I choose to discuss, I might ask you to unmute yourself and chat to me if I've got a few questions about it. But if you don't want to talk, like maybe you've got noisy toddlers in the background or you just want to sort of listen, that's absolutely fine. If I ask you to unmute yourself and you don't want to do it, you can either just ignore me or type in no thank you. So we just want to make sure this is a really relaxed experience for everyone and that everyone gets the most out of it. So more and more people are joining us, which is great to see. And I'll just introduce myself. I am Jodie Clark, as you can see on my little label, and I am a linguist at Sheffield Hallam University, which is also supporting this event, sponsoring my appearance here. I am absolutely in love with all things language. I'm the author of a book called Refreshing Grammar, which I'm not sure whether that's going to show up as reversed in your screen. It's mirror image on mine, so it might be on yours. But and this was just published this summer, called An Easygoing Guide for Teachers, Writers, and Other Creative People, because I absolutely love language. And I love to use the word grammar because grammar can be a very provocative word and it can produce all kinds of feelings. And I like that element of it because to me, grammar is something that I find very fun and interesting and engaging. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go. And often people can associate with grammar with feelings of shame or sometimes wanting to shame other people. So we'll be discussing that. And I've been doing linguistics since oh, brilliant. Perfect, yeah, so someone's enabled closed captioning, that's great. So I've been doing linguistics since I was teaching in Paris, and that's the first time that I started to get really interested in language because I was teaching in an English department at a Parisian university, and I was teaching to speakers of French, and nothing makes you more aware of language than when someone asks you questions about your language that you don't know the answer to. So does anyone in the room, has anyone done any TESOL or teaching English to people who speak other languages? And just well, I'm just looking at the chat now. Thanks for answering Fiz's question, Neil and Anne. It is this is recorded.
I've done TEFL.
Is that Joanna? Yes, you've done some TESOL. Yeah, fantastic. Yes, and Isla says that Isla's a TEFL teacher as well. So you have lots of experience with grammar, and you have this experience of knowing things about your language. What eventually you sort of get the structure of it. You sort of have the language and the meta language for it. But I think when you first start getting into TESOL or TEFL, there's all these things that you know intuitively as a speaker of your language that you don't realize are actually difficult for other people to understand. And I am fascinated by the intuitive element of grammar. And my big the thing that I try to do is to give people ways of accessing what they know intuitively, so that grammar doesn't have to be scary, but that it can also be fun. So I went on to do a master's degree when I moved to Strasbourg, still in France, and I moved on to do a master's degree, and I studied the use of the word like in among a group of American speakers that I knew at the time. And it's lovely to hear, Isla, that you're saying that you love the creativity of grammar, not the rules. So you and I are clearly very kindred spirits. So I was fascinated by this word like. I couldn't believe all of the interesting things that this word does. You know, and when I say like, I mean like when I'm talking like this and people use the word like, and sometimes people get like annoyed by it. And I'm like, why be annoyed? It's just an interesting word. And what I realized when I was studying the word like is that there's all of this interesting structure to the way we speak, and that the structure comes out when we're not thinking about it. And that the structure, like Isla has said, is that there's all these creative opportunities in it. And so I am an absolute lover of language, and I love to love this thing that surrounds us all the time, because there are endless things to fascinate me. And so I went to the UK to do my PhD, and now I'm at Sheffield Hallam, and I get to work with language every single day. And I've started now writing fiction, and so I've been exploring ways that writers can make use of principles of grammar. My fiction is all about language. And it's that I've been exploring ways that grammar can help people feel more excited about writing. And Fiz says rigidity is yucky. It has a toll on creativity. And I think that's a really, really good point. And I think that's something we're going to really get at today. Also, just a quick thing, I'm just curious to know if anybody here is already on my refreshing grammar course, because I'm currently running a refreshing grammar course. This is a free course that's based on some of the principles of the book. So if you're already in the course, it's great to see you. If you're not on it, you're welcome to sign up. There's a few weeks left. And I'll put the link in here now, but I'm also going to send you a link at the end. So if you don't click on the link now, if you don't want to be distracted, but if you're going to be dropping off and you want to make sure you get on the course, there's the link to that. But don't have to worry. I'm going to send you another link at the end of this, and I'll send these links in the Eventbrite as well. Yeah, we've got another couple of weeks of refreshing grammar. So if you want to join it now, you can sort of catch up on the stuff that we've done. It's all recorded, and see if you get on with it. So let's, and the other link, no, I won't give you that link right now. So I just want to start off with a couple of questions. And the first one is, and some of you have already answered this, but what do you think of when you think of the word grammar? So what images come to mind? What associations, what memories, what dreams, what nightmares, if you have nightmares? If you were some of my undergraduate students, I would ask you to give me a meme about what grammar means to you, but that this might not be the crowd for that. I don't know. So if you just want to pop in the chat, what do you associate with grammar? If somebody's got a nice or bad memory of grammar, pop that in there, and I'll just give everyone a couple of seconds. I'm going to mute myself, and I'm just going to give you a couple of seconds to populate the chat with the things that you're thinking about. Okay, so we're already getting some great responses. So Greg says, trying to grasp how to use a semicolon correctly. Okay, so that is not a surprise that that's one of the first things that came up, punctuation and the word correct. And I love that you put it in sort of square quotes there. Neil and Anne are saying rules that I never got taught. This is such a common thing, which is, oh my gosh, there's all these rules about grammar. No one explicitly taught them. And so I don't have access because it's not available to me. It's like trying to do your times tables if you never got taught your times tables. Penny says grammar is important, but having to stick rigidly to it can stultify communication. That's great. It was like Fizz said before, that word rigid is coming up. Rigidity is yucky, Fizz says, and Penny saying it's stultifying communication, having to adhere to rules. Sandra says school. So grammar is something we associate with school, but there are also grammar schools. Just an interesting aside about grammar and the grammar school. Have you ever thought why it's called a grammar school? And the answer that I'm about to give might be the wrong one. but the etymology of grammar is that grammar used to mean both learning about grammar, the way we think of it, but it also just meant learning in general. And it also had this additional meaning, which meant learning about the occult. And if you think about, so learning sort of like spells and magic and demon, and if you've ever heard the word grimoire, a book of demons, a kind of monster manual, if you like, that word grimoire comes from the word grammar, and the word glamour is linked to the word grammar through, I think, a Scottish connection, and to cast a glamour on someone meant to cast a spell on them. And so that when we say somebody's glamorous, they cast a spell over us. So grammar has this really interesting kind of occult etymology, which I also really love. Sarah, you're going to have to explain the panda. Is there a grammar panda that I don't know about? Because I'm going to have to discover this grammar panda. Isla says, learn the rules, master the rules, and then break the rules. How interesting that it's always about rules, isn't it? I'm starting to get a little sweaty with all these words. Kiki says, standard English. So that's a really important point, the notion that we think of grammar as being the rules that we apply to write in standard English or to speak in standard English, whereas actually any form of English, any language, any variety, any dialect has its own grammar. It's just that if we speak in a non-standard dialect, no one thinks it's important for us to learn the rules, even though we're automatically applying those rules. So fantastic comment. Ratip says rules. Yeah, Helen is bringing up the creativity thing, so I appreciate that. So there are challenges, but we get to be creative with it. Oetu says ingredients for the correct use of words. I love that, ingredients. It sounds like a recipe. Joanna, complexity and hidden meanings, i.e. meanings and structure people aren't conscious of. So this lets us understand that there might be a really empowering element to understanding grammar, because we can catch at things that people aren't aware of when they're speaking, which can be really useful. Beth says, thesaurus, dictionaries, textbooks, red pen, black and white rules. There are 3 colors, red, black, and white, which kind of goes against the notion of art and craft. Jane says, not being properly taught it. Rules that, yes, indeed. Yes. Simplicity and clarity. Learning it through other languages. Yes, I'm skipping ahead. Yeah, Liz trusts eats, shoots, and leaves. Helen says more about grammar from learning a foreign language than English at school. So these are such great comments. And I think they all really resonate. The next question I'm going to ask, and I think some people have already answered this one, but I write and talk quite a lot about something that you might have heard of before, and even if you haven't heard of, I think you're going to recognize it, which is, have you ever been grammar shamed? Or have you ever shamed someone else, grammar shamed someone else? And so if anybody's got any experiences of grammar shaming, we can have a little bit of therapy around that if you want. Okay, so Kate, you are a grammar shamer. So you don't like I was sat, and you think people shouldn't say that. So you are shaming other people for saying that. Thank you for confessing to that. So Penny says that was part of English lessons was being shamed. That must have created a really warm and fuzzy classroom environment. So these are great examples. So Isla is ashamed to say, I have shamed and I've been shamed. Do you know, Isla, I think we might all be on both sides of the grammar shaming coin. So I think you're probably in pretty good company. Helen says, interesting that people sometimes imposed grammar shaming on colloquialisms. So these are just sort of expressions that are really part of the language, and people decide to shame you for using your colloquialism. It's really interesting. I mean, I think especially with all of the stuff that happens online, where people feel like they could just be really nasty to each other. But I think well before online communication was a thing, it's really interesting how we can attune to aspects of language that we think either we aren't getting right or that other people aren't getting right. And so this notion that language is a site or a locus for judgment is interesting. And Aisha, thank you for admitting that you're a grammar shamer. You're not a big fan of I were instead of I was. Okay, so thank you for admitting that. Josh says that Grammarly was what shamed you. So we're at next level being shamed when we can be shamed by an app, by something that's automatically checking our grammar, which I think Grammarly does. So we know this experience. And so when you think about any creative work you do with writing, so you're sitting down to write something, you want to write something creative, and I'm sure everyone here does some form of creative writing. So that might be writing in a journal, it might mean writing fiction, it might mean writing poetry, screenplays, song lyrics, it might mean drafting videos that end up being, put online, something like that. If you're someone who's a teacher and you're writing lesson plans, or you're writing curricula for students, all of that might feel like creative work. It might not actually feel creative to you, but we're all sort of doing writing regularly. So I want you to just sort of put yourself in the position where you genuinely feel like you're doing creative writing, where you feel like you're in that creative space where you need to really have that sense of flow and interest in the topic, and you're going to be sort of really genuinely doing that imaginative work of bringing something out of nothing. And the question is, does the grammar shame come in at that moment, and how helpful is it? And so when people are sort of talking about the things that they shame other people for, or the times that they get shamed, does that ever pop up for you when you're writing, that you might be getting the grammar wrong, or you might be getting the writing wrong? Does that ever pop up for anybody when they're trying to do creative writing? And I'd just be curious to hear any experiences about that. And if not, that's great. Oh, yes, we've got some responses here. So Neil and Anne are saying, in creative writing, I go with the flow and look at revising later and being corrected by others. So what you're describing here is a process where we have flow first, correction later. So flow first and then shame, or flow first and then grammar, not grammar first, flow, we write it down. And then shame. And then Penny says, not in English, but when trying to write in another language that you were studying, that kind of got in the way so you're trying to you're thinking, oh, I could be getting this wrong. Ratip says, it stops me from writing. So that's really interesting. It actually stops you from putting the words down. Helen says, if I'm drafting a speech, I would go with the flow, but then be critical and look at grammar. So this is, and Kate says, get it on the page first and refine it later. Fizz says, poetry. I'm so glad you write poetry. I like to write it as it comes, but rewriting it to make it correct ruins the message. This is exactly what my experience has been until recently, and what I think a lot of people's experiences are. And just think about the sort of images that we have. Put it all down, flow, 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 correct later. And the interesting thing from my perspective about that is that the grammar bit is what we associate with the correction, with the revision. And for this workshop, what I'm going to ask is that we see grammar as a way in rather than an afterthought. But we need to change our understanding of grammar. So we cannot think, at least for until 8 o'clock tonight, London time, we can't think, it would be better not to think of grammar as something that you're getting wrong, of something that has rules you don't know, of something that is associated with shame, and is something that is associated with correctness or being corrected. So we need a whole shift in the way that we think about grammar. I mean, maybe we don't need a whole shift, but I'm going to ask you to make that shift. And the reason I'm asking you to make the shift is so that you can be open to some possibilities that I believe grammar can give you if you think about it in a particular way. And then you can close them down later if you don't like them. So I'm just going to give you a flavor. So because I'm so fascinated with grammar, and because I realize that my approach to grammar is not everybody else's approach to grammar, I did this really silly thing where I thought I need to kind of tap in to find out what people think grammar is. And so I actually asked ChatGPT. This was very funny. And I just simply put something in like, what do people think grammar is? And it gave me this great response, which said, people generally associate grammar with the rules. So there's our rules, right? Our rules that help ensure clarity and precision in written and spoken communication. And I thought, actually, that sounds pretty much like what I think people think grammar is. And what I actually wrote in Refreshing Grammar was that grammar is the way we structure our stories in poetry, fiction, and in life. So for me, grammar is not about rules that get imposed. For me, grammar is structure, but not external rules. It's an inner structure. And the reason I say that is because research on language acquisition shows that children embody or have access to the rules of grammar even before they learn to speak. And they can actually test for that. And I've actually done a few little mini tests with my nieces and nephews to see how they actually structure their utterances in a way that shows they have absorbed the grammatical structure of the language that surrounds them, which for them is English. And we actually have intuitively inside our minds, and we've had this well before we could even speak, is the structure of our language. And it's been there since very early on, like, maybe 8 months in from being on the planet and being surrounded by language. So the structure is already there. The thing that people do where they tell you shouldn't say I were, or they should say you shouldn't say I was sad. That's a kind of very human thing where we want to nitpick with people. But another very human thing is we actually have these things inside our brains that structure our experiences. And that is also grammar. It's a type of grammar called descriptive grammar. Or when people study it, it's called descriptive grammar. And the grammar shaming stuff is called prescriptive grammar. And as a linguist, I avoid the prescriptive stuff and I do the descriptive stuff, which is let's pay attention to what people know about their language without knowing that they know about it. So I love to think of grammar as the way that we structure our experiences. I'm going to pause for a second and just see if anybody has any questions about that. I've just thrown a whole bunch of stuff at you. And if you have any questions, just pop them in the chat. Great. So, and if anything comes up in a second, I'll just respond to that. So what I want to do now is just a very small exercise. And this is a grammar exercise, but please don't break out into a cold sweat or, you can do what you like. But I'm going to give you a fill in the gap exercise. And I would like you to put at the end of this, I am looking at blank. And I want you to use as many words as you'd like. You can use 1 word, you can use 2 words, you can use 17 words. You can use as many words as you can fit into the chat. it doesn't have to be what you're looking at, it can, but it can also be what you're looking at right now. So just fill in the blank. I am looking at, and then put something in, and I'll just pause and let folks, it doesn't have to be creative. So I'll just let people pop these in. These are amazing. Okay, so what I'm going to tell you first of all is that exercise actually was not just a prompt, but it was also something called a probe. And what a probe is it's a mechanism for accessing something that you know grammatically. More of them are coming in, so look at those in a second. And I'm looking at is a way of probing for something called a noun phrase. Now, I'm going to be throwing out some terminology. I think most people are probably pretty happy with noun. You might be happy with phrase, but a noun phrase is a particular constituent and particular aspect of language. Most languages have them. And they can take a whole bunch of different forms. They can have things like determiners, they can have adjectives, they can have nouns, they can have all sorts of qualities. But I didn't ask for a noun phrase, because if I'd asked for a noun phrase, who knows what I would have gotten, because not everybody has been taught the rules of grammar, right? So they might not know what that is. But when I say I am looking at, I knew you would give me a noun phrase. And every single thing that I've seen so far has been a noun phrase, even though you're all telling me, a lot of you are telling me that you didn't learn the rules of grammar, or you learned them in school, but they made you nervous. You all produced a noun phrase. And the reason for that is that the probe, and I'm going to throw out some gobbledygook now about language, you can ignore it. But the probe, I am looking, and then at is a preposition, and a preposition is 99.9% of the time followed by a noun phrase, right? So prepositional phrases are prepositions plus noun phrase. We're not worried about that, but I just want to let you know how that probe works. And so let's have a look now at our noun phrases. And I want you to ask yourself the question, is it a noun phrase? Kate says, I am looking at her. Is her a noun phrase? You bet your bottom dollar it is. Well done, Kate. Her is a noun phrase. And it might, if I'd asked for a noun phrase, you might not have given me her, because you might have said, well, that's a pronoun, not that it's a noun phrase. Richard says, I am looking at the future, right? So another noun phrase, we've got a determiner, and we have also a noun. Now, nouns are thingies, like they feel like things. The future is not a thing. The future is a wibbly wobbly, timey-wimey thing, if anybody's familiar with Doctor Who. And yet we structure our experience, right? So we treat the future like it's a thing we can look at, right? And so we're structuring our experience with grammar. And he says, I am looking at, and you ready for this? This is a whopper of a noun phrase, a picture of a white cat which was sitting on my doorstep. That whole shebang is a noun phrase, and Penny has included an enormous amount of stuff within that noun phrase, and it's got all of these prepositional phrases within it. It's got adjectives. It also has a little clause she snuck in there when no one was looking. Aisha says, I am looking at happiness. This is like the future, right? One word, happiness. It's a noun phrase. Aisha has shaped her experience, and she's taken this quality, an emotional quality, and she's treating it like a thing, a noun phrase. We get to shape our experiences. Kiki says, I'm looking at you, a mirror, my options, and lots of debt. I hope those things aren't necessarily related. But yeah, so Kiki overachieved and gave us 1, 2, 3, 4 perfectly great noun phrases. My laptop screen, the little emerald green door. I'm looking for ideas in my writing. Excellent. Another noun phrase. The all the time is a separate thing, but it's great. I'm looking at a town bathed in sunlight on a warm summer's evening, says Helen. The whole thing is a noun phrase. And once more, with that, we're shaping our experiences. Every single one of us could be looking at the same, if you're looking out your window, let's say, every single one of us could be looking at that. Our noun phrase might be different. right? So one person could be looking at that and saying a town bathed in sunlight on a warm summer's evening. Another person could be looking at that and saying, I'm looking at lots of debt, because they realize they can't afford to live in the town bathed in sunlight. So we've got, with each of these experiences, we're shaping our experiences, we're using noun phrases to effectively focus in, draw our attention to the aspect that we are shaping. So these are fantastic. Yes. And Joanna, I'm not treating that as out of bad manners, the question you're asking, why am I giving you this exercise? What I would love, this
Actually,
is
it wasn't a question, it was a noun phrase. I just didn't put in, I am looking at.
I see.
And then there was a capital letter.
I am looking at why you are giving us this exercise out of curiosity. Well, that's fantastic, because when I was reading that, I read it as, why are you giving us this? Do you see what I did? I turned it into a clause, but the way you phrased it was a noun phrase. I am looking at why you are giving us this exercise. Fantastic. So it's not a question. I won't answer it. I'm looking at a long list of jobs I should be doing. Fantastic. Rajiv says we get to grammar shame him afterwards, or grammar shame them. I'm not sure what Rajiv's pronouns are. But so what we've got here are all of these ways of shaping our experiences. And we did it with grammar, right? And it was easy. And I didn't see, I mean, I can't see everybody's face, but I didn't see anybody break out into sweat. And I didn't see anybody panic. And people came up with them very, very quickly, right? It was instant. You know, some of you came up with 6 in one go. Some of you came up with 20 words. And what you did was grammar. And you're sort of doing grammar all the time, but you don't realize it. And so the question is, I mean, obviously you realize it, but you don't necessarily think about it as grammar. But if we can sort of look at language and see it as structure, as grammatical structure, we might end up with some access to writing that makes things a little bit easier and makes things more interesting. The reason I called this session the art and craft of grammar is because when I contrast the experience of writing something and feeling like I'm going to be grammar shamed with this experience that I sometimes have when I decide I want to play with art, or I want to play with craft. So if I want to do some like knitting, or I want to make something, maybe a little bit of bricolage, or maybe when I give myself some permission to get my hands in some clay. I don't really have I'm not a great artist. I don't necessarily have any great expectations for what my work is going to be. But if you give me a tube of paint, it gets very exciting because I can sort of feel the tube. I press it out into the little dish thing, the palette. I play with it, I stick it on the thing, and then suddenly there's a streak of blue that wasn't there before. And to me, maybe because I'm not an artist, because I don't have that familiarity with what makes for good art, it's very interesting and exciting to think, this blue does a thing, and it's got a texture, and it's got materiality, it's got physicality. Or clay, I love working with clay. Once again, I'm very bad at it. And maybe because I'm bad at it, it gives me lots of permission to simply just enjoy the feeling of it in my hands and imagine how it has some give. And notice how there's, you know, certain ways that it can be pressed, and then you can't press it any further before it sort of disintegrates or something like that. And that experience for me of the materiality of art or craft, and that feeling that I'm making something with my hands, is the same type of experience that I want to experience with my writing. I want to feel like it's material, like it's a thing, that it's something that I can structure. And if I press it a different way, it goes a different way. And then I can play with and experiment with. And that's why I've called it the art and craft of grammar. And once again, the other element of that is when I look at children who are like in an art classroom, there's a really different quality to the way they're enjoying the art, which often they are, to that experience of being potentially in an English classroom where they're desperately trying not to make the mistakes their teacher might be telling them they're making. And with me, because I do teach sort of grammar, I teach courses in linguistics, so the students have to learn grammar. And I'm trying to create more of an art room sort of situation, more of an art room vibe, I sometimes call it, rather than oh, I could get it wrong, I don't know what I'm doing, I'm being taught the rules kind of vibe. And so that's the way I would love for people to experience grammar. And I hope you had that a little bit with the I'm looking at exercise, because it was easy. Because you could come up with a million different things, which you knew right away, and you didn't have to think about it. And every single thing that you came up with was a shaping of your experience. So I'm just going to pause for a second and see if anybody has any thoughts or comments about what we're saying so far, about the notion of grammar and it being a structuring device in the way of structuring experience, and how it can be a little bit more like arts and crafts than it can be like red pens. Okay, I'm not getting any questions, so we're going to assume that we're doing okay. So what I'm going to do now is give you, oh, actually, no, we've got a couple of questions here, so let's respond to these. Helen says, I like the idea of arts and crafts as it's more accessible. This is such an interesting thing, that grammar, as it happens, is one of the most accessible things we have, because we've been doing it since we were little cutie pies. And our brains have known it since before we could even speak. But because we have that human tendency of thinking that we don't know what we're doing or wanting to tell other people not to do it, that shame comes in. But I'm glad you like the metaphor. Neil and Anne are saying conversation and creative writing is very different from how we speak. Yeah, that's right. And I think that aspect, I've done a lot of exercises, especially a lot of my work is on transcribing conversations. And if you look at a transcript of a conversation, it's very different. And I think one way of looking at that is the I'm looking at exercise, right? So if you were to write, I'm looking at, and then put the thing after at, compared with taking a camera and taking a photo of it, right? The camera takes a photo of the thing that shows up in the lens. And the I'm looking at structures the experience of what you wish to experience in the moment of looking. And so it's the same thing with character dialogue. You structure the experience of the dialogue compared to simply listening to what somebody's saying. And so this is one of the things I love about creative writing, is that we get to actually actively, consciously think about how we're structuring our experience. Fizz says, I guess it depends on knowledge of what's available on the palette. And that's one of the reasons why I've written the book Refreshing Grammar, and why I do these things, is because often people are closed down to learning about grammar because it feels really scary. And I would love for people to know, actually, if we know how to access aspects of grammar using what's called our linguistic intuition, it becomes less scary and it becomes available. So I just feel like people aren't aware of the colors that are available to them grammar-wise, because all they see is red, white, and black. The red pen, and so I can't remember who said this, but the black and white and the red pen. And so that's not a particularly full spectrum. Aisha, that's a really lovely, lovely way of putting it. Grammar provides a sense of freedom. For me, it does provide a sense of freedom, because when I'm not orienting to grammar, and by grammar, I'm again talking about the structuring of experience, then I don't necessarily feel like I've got lots of ways of saying something. But the second I orient to grammar, I realize I've got several ways of saying something. And it's funnily enough, it's the constraints that actually give me the freedom, but it's a different type of constraint. So I'm looking at is a probe, it's a constraint. The only thing you're allowed to put after that is a noun phrase, but it's not a prescriptive constraint, because I didn't tell anybody you could only use a noun phrase. You all just automatically put in a noun phrase because your brain knows to do it. Right? So your brain already has these structures, and when we can tap into them, it's like having a really lovely container that you can grow something in. I know I'm mixing my metaphors, as opposed to, you write anything, just write something, write anything. Whereas I'm looking at, it's easy because I've given you a structure to write to, and then everybody writes a noun phrase, but all of the noun phrases were incredibly different. And this is one of the exciting creative aspects of language. You will never, ever, ever be able to complete you'll never be able to ever catalog all of the noun phrases or all of the clauses or all of the adjectival phrases, etc. They are endless, but all of them can be labeled as a noun phrase. So these are really, really fantastic comments. Okay, I'm going to give you another writing prompt, and this one is potentially going to be a little bit less It might take a little bit more thought, so I'm going to give you a little bit more time to do it. And I'm actually going to share my screen so that you can see it, because it's getting later in the evening and our attention span might be disappearing a bit. So let's pop that there, share my screen. Hold on one second, I'm going to close my email so that those don't pop up. Great, here we go. Okay, and so what you should be seeing now is a little writing prompt, and I'm just going to ask people to I'm going to give you a few minutes to do this, about 5 minutes. And this is not supposed to be great works of literature. So I use when I said the word masterpiece at the bottom, please don't take that literally. That's a sort of ironic use of the word masterpiece. But write 2 to 4 sentences about this could be a real person, or it could be a character, and choose. So it could be if it's a real person, don't name them or give them a pseudonym. So it could be somebody who's unbearably annoying. It could be the love of your life or the love of someone else's life. Or it could be you as the love of someone's life. It could be a terrifying figure. So this could be somebody you remember from childhood who was terrifying, or that you can imagine might be terrifying, or someone that actually terrifies you now, or a completely fictional character, or someone who is an inspiration to you or to others, or etc. So this is not supposed to be amazing writing. This is not supposed to be, it really isn't supposed to be a masterpiece. Well, what we'll be using your examples to talk about the grammar, but we will not be grammar shaming. We'll be talking about the structure of what you've written. So if you would like to get some insights on what you've written, some grammatical insights, or you would simply like to share, write those 2 to 4 sentences, pop them in the chat, and I'll choose one at random. And then we'll do a little bit of an analysis. And if you would not like me to do that, don't pop it in the chat. So give everybody a couple of minutes to do that. Okay, those are absolutely amazing. And I'm not sure I actually got to see every single one of them, but they were really, really impressive. I can't believe that you all just managed to do that in such a short period of time. So what I'm going to do now, I've copied and pasted a lot of those. I think I haven't, actually, let me just add your Sushmita really quick. And I'm gonna stop with Sushmita's last one. Just add that to the and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to share my screen. I've popped these all into a Google Doc. And I'll share my screen, but I'll also share with you the Google Doc in case you'd like to look at it without it being a screen share, but it's okay if not. So and let me just share my screen. So there we go. Okay, so no, that's the wrong one. Sorry, stop share. I did the wrong one. Share my screen, but that's the one. Brilliant, yeah. Okay, so this is a writing prompt that I popped in the book Refreshing Grammar called Let's Change the Subject. And what we're going to be doing with this is I've asked you to write 2 to 4 sentences about a person or character. I can't believe how good these were. And what we're going to do is we're going to recognize that there's a particular structure to these. We're going to divide them into clauses. So again, I'm not necessarily going to explain all of the terminology because as it happens, your brain already knows it. Well, it doesn't know the terminology, but it knows what a clause is. But I use this approach to grammar called a clause-based approach, which is rather than worrying about like whether a word's a noun or an adjective, we do think about that. But rather than sort of starting from that perspective, and rather than worrying about noun phrases and adjective phrases, I know we just worried about noun phrases, but we think in terms of a whole clause. A clause is something that a linguist whose name is M.A.K. Halliday, whose work I follow, he refers to it as a quantum of information. Like we find out. We can kind of convey the information that we need in a clause. And so a clause has different elements, and you might have heard things like a subject and a verb, like your clause needs to have a subject and a verb, and they need to agree with each other. Well, what's fascinating about clauses and about subjects and verbs is that we can actually access these really easily. And actually, I'm actually going to start with, let me just close this for a second. I need to give myself a little bit more. There we go. I'm going to actually start with the first one that we got, which was Penny's. Small, shy, and blonde, she takes a few minutes to start to chat, but what follows is both entertaining and adorable. She's only 2, but I love her so. So that's I think that Penny, that might have been the love of someone's life, which is a lovely thing. And I'm just going to show you what we can do with that, which is vaguely interesting. So what we're doing is we're going to divide these into clauses, and I'm just going to make this a tiny bit bigger. So that we can see it relatively easily. And I'm going to do this. As it happens, Penny, almost all of your clauses correspond to your sentences, but there's actually one that's a compound sentence. So we're going to separate that into clauses. So if you don't mind just trusting me for a moment, that those are indeed what are called the finite clauses of Penny's story. What we're going to just do is recognize that we can find the subjects of each of those clauses, even when we don't. We can also find the verbs, and every finite clause needs to have a subject and a verb. But we're just going to find the subjects of these clauses using a really, really simple probe. Now, where did I do with mention? Oh, let's get that back up. Well, I was sort of vaguely want to ask whether, oh, actually, sorry, I didn't send the link to everybody. I only sent it to Joanna. So let me just do this again. This is the link to the Google Doc, if anybody wants to follow on the link. Sorry about that. It was just me and Joanna on there for a second. But yeah, so what we're going to do is to find the subject and the verb. So if we start with this, and I'm not going to actually ask you to put the answer in, but if we start with that one, small, shy, and blonde, she takes a few minutes to start to chat. And I asked you what the subject is. The question is, how confident would you be to find the subject of that clause? And maybe what you could do is put into the chat a number. So 5 is, oh, I'd feel really confident. I know it. I'd be able to tell you off the top of my head. And 1 is, I don't feel confident at all. I'm not even sure what a subject is. So if you just don't mind putting a number in the chat as to how comfortable you are with finding the subject of, say, that clause. Yeah, Penny knows right away. Kirsty does too. And Greg knows at about a 4. Yeah, so people are really, really happy. No, it's not necessarily easy if you wrote it, Penny, by the way, and everybody knows it. Okay, so Aisha's doing the refreshing grammar course, so Aisha knows where I'm going with this. Okay, fantastic. So now I'm going to let you tell me what the subject is. Just pop it in the chat. I wouldn't let you tell me before. Uh-oh, everybody who said 5 is a little nervous now. Thank you, got it right, Helen. That's fine. Perfect. Fantastic. So the subject of that is she. So we're going to make that so we're going to make that we're going to make that a nice sort of blue color. Okay, now look at this one. But what follows is both entertaining and adorable. How comfortable are you with finding the subject of that clause? Give me a scale of 1 to 5. Okay. Right. Okay. So Josh is down at a 2. Folks are at 4. Joanna's at a 5. Sushmita's at a 3. Okay. Holly's at a 2. Great. Okay. So for those who feel comfortable, maybe tell me what the subject is of that second clause. It's starting to feel like grammar class now, isn't it? Yeah, that's right. Exactly, Helen. Brilliant. Okay. So here's our clause there. Now, what if you didn't? Oh, I got 2 different colored blues. It's all right. We're going to use all the palettes. So what if you didn't know? What if you were at a sort of level of 2 and you were a level of comfort, you in terms of being able to find that? There is a really nice, easy way to identify what the subject of a clause is. And you can also use it to find the verb of a clause. And what you do is you just take your clause and you stick something at the end of it. And Aisha knows what I'm about to say because she's done the course. And you pop what's called a question tag at the end of it. A question tag is a beautiful thing. A question tag we use in conversation when we are sort of asking for confirmation or checking to see whether somebody's tracking with us. You would say, small, shy, and blonde. She takes a few minutes to start to chat. Doesn't she? And this is pretty easy for folks whose first language is English. We can quite easily find our question tag because we use them pretty regularly in conversation. We stick a question tag at the end of things. And the question tag is a beautiful probe to use because the pronoun in a question tag will point you very reliably to the subject of your sentence or subject of your clause. So doesn't she points us to she, and there's our subject. Now that might not seem as exciting because quite a lot of you were pretty high on the scale of where am I comfortable with what the subject of that clause is. But some folks weren't as comfortable with but what follows is both entertaining and adorable. So what we're going to do now is just pop a question tag at the end of that. What would be your question tag? So, if we know that like doesn't she is a question tag or haven't they or mustn't we, these are the types of questions. These are all question tags. How about, but what follows is both entertaining and adorable. Exactly. People are just popping that in straight away because it's really easy to find, isn't it? Exactly. And so your brain knows it. Your brain knows it. Your brain doesn't have to like take a million classes on how to do grammar. All it needs is that question tag. And then what we do is we look at the pronoun, and you don't even need to know the word pronoun, quite frankly. You can just look at the last little piece of the question tag because, spoiler alert, it will always be something called a subject pronoun. So you don't even need to know the word pronoun, but I suspect most people do. And we can look at the word it. And what we do is we check the clause. There's no it in the clause, but we check to see what the word it would replace, because pronouns replace noun phrases. And we realize that we could say, but it is both entertaining and adorable. So it replaces what follows. And that's how we know that what follows is the subject. Isn't that cool? So our pronoun does that really nice. Our question tag does that really nicely. These other ones are kind of yeah, Sushmita says that's cool. I thank you, Holly. Thank you, Kate. No, Fizz, we're not changing it. We're not adding these to Penny's story. We're only using when we read, yeah. I'm not asking that you stick question tags at the end of everything. No, we're just using them to find the subject, and then we get rid of them. And but I love the question tag probe because you can teach it. If anybody's a teacher, you can take that in the classroom. Well, not tomorrow. Tomorrow's Saturday. But you can take that in on Monday, and they'll be finding the subject like nobody's business. You don't even need to explain what a noun phrase is. Pronoun is easy, you just the last thing in the question tag, and then what does it replace? And we've got this here, she's only 2. What's our question tag for she's only 2? Just pop it in the chat. Yeah, brilliant, thanks. Sometimes they get so easy, nobody wants to do it. Thank you, Greg. Isn't she? We look to the pronoun or the last little bit of our question tag, and there is our subject. But I love her so, and what's my question tag for that? Brilliant, perfect. Yeah, so people are getting that straight away. Don't I, and we look to our pronoun, and we realize that I is the subject. So thanks, Penny, for letting us look at your story, because it's given us a really nice little structure. And what I sometimes like to do is look at them and say, once I've got a few clauses down, clauses are structured. They're structured into subjects and verbs. And I sometimes just like to look at the pattern of the subjects, just the subjects, because grammar structures our experience. And the people in our lives are structured by the grammar that we use to describe them, by the linguistic structure we use. So when Penny wrote this, she was structuring her, this person, this sort of 2-year-old person, in her subject by saying she and she. And then she does hear her, but her isn't the subject at that point. So when we look at our subjects, we've got she, what follows, she, and I. And that's a really interesting structure for me. So we know it's about this she character, and we know that but then it switches from she to what follows. And so we've got a way of making the child's behavior nounified. This is the process called nominalization. So rather than but her behavior is both entertaining and adorable, she said what follows. Interestingly, that subject, by the way, is a clause. So you've somehow found a way to sneak, lots of you already knew the answer to that, so that's impressive, but you managed to sneak that whole clause in as a subject, which is kind of next level. So I would love to just have a look at somebody else's for a moment. No, that's no problem at all. No problem at all. I'm certainly not asking. I'm glad you actually, I'm sure somebody else thought that too, but we're certainly not asking people to stick question tags at the end of their writing. Okay, I'm just going to choose this one at random. This is Beth's. And we're going to pop her story here. And I'm going to go ahead and do the work of turning it into clauses. All right. I'm going to actually pop that there. Stick that there. I didn't even, it's so funny. I didn't even actually read it because I was so focused on the grammar. And now I'm like, oh, this is so sweet, Beth. I love this. Okay, let me get my chat back up. There we go. Okay. So what we're going to do now is just do our little thing where we're going to find the subject of each of these clauses. And we're going to start with he's the person I didn't expect him to be. Okay, so what we're going to do here is, even though you probably know the subject, we're still going to use the question tag here. So he's the person I didn't expect him to be. What's my question tag? Pop that in the chat for us. Brilliant. And everybody's getting it. Isn't it easy? Okay, so we look to the pronoun and we check to see what he replaces. So what's the actual subject of the clause? Brilliant. Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. Now, is anybody seeing any complications? Some of you are kind of, I can tell some of you are grammar nerds. Anybody seeing any complications with that clause? It's okay if not. Ah, you're such a grammar nerd, Crystal. I hope you don't mind. That's a compliment, by the way. Yeah, that's right. Helen also is a grammar nerd. Yeah. So what about I? So people are saying, what about the Crystal saying there's two, like there's two subjects, right? And Helen is saying, what about I? Now I'm just gonna, this one's for the grammar nerd. This is the fascinating thing about the question tag probe. It points, this is actually a complex sentence that has two clauses in it, and one of them is a relative clause. Okay, so I apologize, you don't need to know this terminology. I'm just throwing it out there for folks who want to hear it. And so your question tag probe is always going to point you to the subject of the main clause. Okie dokie. And that's a thing that I absolutely love in teaching, because sometimes you just want to find the main clause. And then if you wanted to find that relative clause, what you would do is separate that out, pop that down here, and then you do another question tag. I didn't expect him to be, did I? And then you've got your subject of the second clause. But I like to say, when we've got these complex, we've got embedded clauses, I like to just, at the moment, just to focus on the main clauses. Does that make sense? Any questions about that? But I wanted to throw that in there because you had an interesting one there. Okay. This one's interesting, right? We're going to play with this bit of language here. From Beth. And I'm going to see if can we get a question tag? So what I need, but not endless butterflies that make my heart dance, just comfort and safety. Do you have a question tag for that? Don't I? Isn't he? Yeah. Don't I? Yeah. Yeah. This one's a little bit tricky because and Penny's picked this up, is because this whole thing is kind of a little bit, it's the answer to this question. And this is why Penny said, isn't he? It's like got an elided, he is what I need, but not endless butterflies that make my heart dance. So then this is absolutely fine, because as it stands, it's not what we call a finite clause, because what's happened here is that Beth has elided, or she sort of borrowed from the first bit. So this is really interesting. So so strictly speaking, it would be that the subject would be he, but it's not actually written in there. So that's a kind of tricky one. Now, when people said, don't I, what you've hooked into there is the embedded clause. I need, what I need, don't I? But that's actually an embedded clause within this kind of bigger structure. So Beth has thrown us for a little bit of a loop, and this just shows us that language is really complicated. So anything that we can do to make it a little bit simpler, we want to do. So oh, hold on. This is a separate clause. Okay, how about this next one? We're going to leave this here for now, and we're going to sort of leave that as a kind of, we're going to put it back the way Beth had it. And then, well, no, we'll keep it back in because this isn't an understood he. How about this one? This was a little bit more straightforward. He has a laugh that lights up the room. What's our question tag there? Oh, no, I shouldn't have divided that. He has a laugh that lights up the room and eyes that melt my heart. What's our question tag? Oh, sorry, they were all here. Yeah, absolutely doesn't. He doesn't. He doesn't. Yeah. And so we can check and say, what is our subject? And it's pretty clear here that our subject is he. Yeah. And there we go. And then the next one is his arms. Oh, yeah, this is the one that has two different compound clauses. His arms feel like home. What's our question tag for that one? Yeah, brilliant, don't they? Yeah, excellent. And so what does get ahead of myself. And what does they actually replace? What's the subject? If they is in our question tag, yeah. And what we want to do exactly, we want the whole noun phrase, because we want to say they feel like home. So we replace it with the whole noun phrase, his arms. And then we want to take the last one, brilliant. So we take the last one and he scatters compliments like confetti through our days together. I love this guy. But no, that's not the point. What's our question tag? Physio is asking, Physio, I'm not sure what your question is. So if you don't mind asking that question again, that would be great. Maybe clear it up for me. And yeah, our question tag here is doesn't he? Yeah. And then once more, our subject is he. So, oh, got it. Yeah. So Fizz is asking his arms feel like home. We're looking at the pronoun in the question tag. The pronoun is they. And they is a pronoun that replaces the noun phrase, his arms. So his arms is a noun phrase. Does that answer your question? So pronouns replace noun phrases, and his arms is a noun phrase. And Neil and Anne are asking, sentence 2, what I need, just comfort and safety, but not riot, not endless butterflies, etc. Does this change the subject just by moving the sentence around? I'm not sure what you're asking, Neil and Anne. Would you like to unmute yourself and ask? It's okay if not. I'm just not entirely sure what your question is asking. I need, but not endless butterflies. And the third sentence, if you break it into clauses, our eyes are the subject of the second clause. Yeah. So the third sentence, yeah, absolutely. He has a laugh. So he has what? A laugh that lights up the room and eyes that melt my heart. And what Beth has done is she's put, these are called compliments, by the way, she's put in a couple of relative clauses there, lights up the room, melt my heart. Yeah. And so it's actually, okay, sorry, Penny, because you're being a little bit specific, I'm going to actually tell you. So this, as it happens, the subject of the second clause here is the word that. And the subject of the third clause is the word that too. But that's like advanced level. So I apologize that it's a little bit, but for all intents and purposes, eyes is perfectly fine and laugh is perfectly fine, if you see what I mean. But strictly speaking, the subject of those words is that relative pronoun that. Sorry. Neil and Anne. So what I need, just comfort and safety, but not endlessly. Okay. If you wanted I to be the subject of the second sentence, what you'd say is, let me just get it. What you'd say is, I need not endless butterflies that make my heart dance, just comfort and safety, don't I? You see what I mean? And so if you moved it around, then I would be your subject. It's the what that tells us that it's something called a complement. Okay, thanks. I'm glad that we were able to answer that. So I think I tried to answer 2 questions at once, and they were both advanced grammar. Okay, so let's head back and look at our subjects. And what we've got here, we've got he, his arms, and he, right? So this is kind of a nice little structure. We're talking about a person. And we were finding out all these things about the person, but all of our subjects are also the same thing, he, except for his arms. And so what you can do, and the way you can play when you're writing about someone and when you're writing about anything, you can have a look at your clauses and see what your subjects are, and then just play with maybe shifting the subjects around. So not necessarily changing what you're trying to say, but simply shifting the subjects around so that it's not the person that you're writing about. So with this thing here, with the he's the person I didn't expect him to be, right? So we could simply change it to be something like, I didn't expect him, right? And then your subject is I. But you could also potentially make your subject something that isn't a person. You know, you could use, remember the I'm looking at exercise is something like endless butterflies could be your subject, right? Endless butterflies is are not what I expect, right? So you could make endless butterflies the subject of your thing, and then you can maybe play with it. And maybe we don't find out until the end of the passages. We could say, you know, he has a laugh that lights up the room. We could say, his laugh lights up the room. His eyes melt my heart. His arms feel like home. His compliments scatter like confetti through our days together. And so when we do that, it's not that that's necessarily better writing, right? But it's just a slightly different version. And for me, what that feels like is when I start shifting my subjects, it makes me feel like I've just got another color on the paper, right? And all I have to do is just shift subjects at that moment. I don't have to change the whole thing. I don't have to rewrite everything. I'm just changing my subjects. And what that does for me is it opens things up. I think, oh, I could say something entirely different. And we look at this, endless butterflies are not what I expect, are they? His laugh lights up the room, doesn't it? His eyes melt my heart, don't they? His arms feel like home, don't they? His compliments scatter like confetti, don't they? Yeah. And so Helen is saying it's making it more poetic, and maybe it is. It depends on what effect you want, and it depends on what you're doing. But for me, what it does is it makes me feel like I've got some interesting new ways of looking at things, right? And maybe it's not, you know, maybe I don't want it to be more poetic. Maybe I do want he to be the subject of all of the sentences. I could shift it around so it's all about me in the beginning, right? It could be my room lights up when my room lights up at his laugh. My heart at his laugh. My heart melts in his eyes. My home awaits in his arms. Our days are scattered with confetti, right? And again, it's not better, but it's different. It's a different color. It's a different way of shaping the clay. And I can do all of that by simply paying attention to just the subject. And what I'm doing when I do that with the grammar of it, I'm not worried about embedded clauses. I'm not worried about relative pronouns. I'm just looking at the subject. I can find them easy with my question tag, and it just gives me something to play with. And when I do that, there comes a point, and a lot of you are already at this point, you don't necessarily need your question tag to find your pronoun. The question tag, by the way, helps you also find the verb and all kinds of other interesting things. So don't give up the question tag. But by recognizing that you have a question tag and that you can access the stuff in your mind, you can then look at the structure of what you're writing and look at the clauses, and just have a little bit of a play. Just play with it. Try something new. It doesn't have to be great. It's just that experience of playing. So I'm going to stop sharing, and we're sort of we're kind of moving towards the end. And in a second, I'm just going to ask if anybody's got any questions. But there's one more thing I want to share with you before folks leave, which is there's a little link that I'm going to give just for you all. And this is if you want to know a little bit more about some of the things that I have to sort of offer. I do courses, and I do fiction, and I do podcasts. I do like loads of things. So if you'd like to be on the list to find out about all of the things that I do that you might want to participate in, I've done a special link just for y'all. So if you want to click on that and just put your information in there, you'll get an email from me straight away if you'd like to know more. And that's kind of for folks who have been on this call, or if you're listening in the future, you can still join in with that link. So I just want to make sure I got that out there before I forgot. And now in our last couple of minutes, I just want to ask if anybody has any questions. I'll just give you a chance. And if you at this point, I think if folks, if you want to actually speak your question rather than chat it, just put in the chat that you'd like to unmute so that not everybody speaks at once. So any questions or thoughts?
I love grammar, and I think this is fantastic.
Oh.
But the last exercise, I think, comes back to the fact that people know things intuitively.
Exactly.
And writers do this. I mean, you might put he, and then you look at it and you think, that's not quite right.
That's right.
But you don't think, I need a new subject. You just sort of do the new subjects because the grammar's embedded in your head somewhere.
Joanna, you put it so beautifully. You and I are exactly on the same page with this. Writers do this intuitively. Speakers do it intuitively, but writers do it at a level of craft and literariness. They do it, and you're exactly right. They don't think, I need to change the subject. They think, I want to change this, and they do. I agree with you entirely. And what I like is that for me, when I'm writing, sometimes I have access to it and sometimes I don't. And when I don't have access to it, it's really lovely to, rather than wait for the kind of like poetic inspiration, it's really nice to be able to give myself a task. And for me, for the way when I operate writing wise, because I'm not somebody who can afford to wait for inspiration or to afford to have those really sort of lovely poetic moments. I like to be able to just give myself, and sometimes I do give myself a little grammar task like that, and it makes me tap into the intuition. And the other thing that I love the grammar bit for is when I read a phenomenal piece of writing, I like to know what they're doing. And I like to be able to unpick what they're doing, because for me, the phenomenal pieces of writing are beautiful and sometimes intimidating. But once I can sort of access it by doing something like the question tag probe, it's like the penny drops. I'm like, I see what you did there. My husband is a writer, and he has never learned grammar, and well, he knows some of it now because of he listens in. But sometimes I hear him read stuff to me, and I see exactly what he's done with the grammar. It's all done intuitively. He doesn't do it by assigning question tag probes. So that was a fantastic question. Thank you for putting it that way. That was really clarifying. Okay, and I'll just have a quick read of other folks' things. Yeah, okay. Thanks for joining us, Fiz, while you could. Bye, Helen. I'm glad you enjoyed it. And I'm glad other folks are grammar lovers. Kate's asking, who do I like to read? Kate, there's a lot of folks I like to read, but I think in terms of the actual writing style that I feel most in love with and intimidated by is the specific writing in Michael Ondaatje's The English Patient. And because he writes a kind of with a sensuality that I struggle with myself, his physical descriptions embed everything. And the descriptions of the physical world, the material world in Ondaatje are linked up entirely with his themes, and they're so powerful. So he's the one that I have sat down and written out the grammatical structure of those things. So that's the kind of person that I go to for inspiration for myself in terms of the things that I'm not great at. So thanks for asking that question. Josh says, can you recommend some grammar resources? Josh, did I tell you I wrote a book? You should go get that book, Refreshing Grammar, because read that one. I know I wrote it, but read that one first, because that is relaxed and like kind of like, ooh, okay, now you've done that exercise, now go have a cookie kind of grammar book. Read that one first, and then it'll make the other grammar books accessible. I wrote this one because the grammar books are not accessible to, it's certainly not to my students. So yeah, Eats, Shoots, and Leaves is prescriptive, y'all. That's a kind of a little bit of a grammar shaming book, right? So if you're into that, go for it. If you're into grammar shaming, don't read mine. I'm glad you enjoyed it, Hannah, and I think we're just about sort of closing down. So if people have to leave, that's great. I mean, it's been lovely to have you. I really appreciate how willing you were to participate in the activities. You did such a great job with it. It was great to meet. Woe is I. What is the subject of Woe is I? And I'd love to hear from you soon. Thanks, Aisha. Thanks for joining. Thanks, Neil and Anne. I really appreciate you being here. Thanks, Sushmita. And I hope everybody lovely, wonderful. It was a lovely end to my week as well. Thanks, everybody. So I hope that we'll stay in touch and that we'll be chatting with you again real soon. Bye-bye, everyone.